Welcome to another fine Montana day and another episode of the Electric Bison. Today, I'd like to visit for a few minutes about what happened with Montana's 163rd Infantry Regiment back in World War II. It got activated early back in September of 1940, along with soldiers comprising 18 divisions of National Guard troops across the country. And then over time, they trained hard out at Fort Lewis, where the people there were really excited and interested in all the Native American soldiers that were in the unit. There were soldiers there whose parents, grandparents fought against Custer and in other battles against the U.S. government, but they were there as U.S. troops. There's pictures in the Tacoma newspaper outside of Fort Lewis of them standing at attention with their rifles at present arms. But as time went by, and the 163rd Infantry Regiment trained harder and longer, the war clouds in Europe got real bad when Germany invaded France. But then when Pearl Harbor happened in December 1941, the unit that was already mobilized on the West Coast, had been mobilized for 2 years, knew it was going to be fighting the Japanese. It's just a matter of when. And then what happened was the 41st Infantry Division, of which the 163rd was one of the regiments, began shipping out for Australia. And the 163rd from Montana was on the Queen Elizabeth, was the first one to hit Australia in April of 1942. And then once they were in Australia, they started training even more intensively for jungle warfare. Meanwhile, another division called the 32nd Infantry was also a Guard division, had been training to go to Europe after the fall of France. And it suddenly had to make a U-turn and start thinking about the Pacific. They were soldiers from Wisconsin and Michigan. But they had to start thinking about the Pacific because Australia was in danger, and the Australians had called back their 6th and 7th Infantry Divisions from fighting in the Middle East and North Africa. They wanted their 9th Division to come back, but it was tied up at Torbrook, big battle there, and fighting Rommel and all that. So the 6th and the 7th Australian Infantry came down to help defend their home country. And there was a compromise made in that decision to not move the 9th back to Australia. And the compromise was that the 32nd Infantry that had been headed for Europe was turned 180 and went to the Pacific. The first units of the 32nd got down to Australia about a month behind the 163rd Infantry Regiment from Montana. They came on different ships by a different route to a different part of Australia. And unfortunately, they were banged around Australia, and they didn't get a lot of further military training in. And then when the time came when the Australians needed to have that 3rd Division to start really seriously fighting the Japanese in New Guinea, MacArthur volunteered the 32nd to get an American division on the ground. And it didn't go well for the 32nd because it wasn't ready. A lot of the men were killed. They were sent walking over some pretty rough country over the Owen Stanley Range, not the Kokoda Trail, but another one. And they were basically used up real fast. It took a lot of casualties. And however, they were also kind of in the area where the Montanans ended up fighting for the first time. And you'll hear discussion of Huggins, Perimeter Huggins. That was named after one of the fights that the 32nd Infantry Division put up, a very valiant fight. But then they were wore out, had to be pulled out. The Australians were in there, and they were worn out too. So the Montanans got the call And instead of going in September of 1942 over to New Guinea from Australia to defend Australia, they got the call just at the end of the year, and they were moving into position in January. They flew over the Owen Stanley Range. They didn't walk. Landed on a couple of dirt airstrips. They were attached to the 7th Australian Division, which was an excellent military unit. And as part of that division, they were given responsibility for Sanananda, which was the area in between Buna, which had been a lot of fighting had been going on already to the east on the tip of New Guinea, and Gona, which was a little bit farther to the west. So I think it's interesting that so many of Montana's soldiers were Native American. Almost the entire complement of Company B out of Poplar was Native American, Sioux or Lakota, and Assiniboine or Nakota tribesmen. And then the unit out of Chinook, it had an awful lot of Assiniboine and Gros Ventre, white clay people. And then the Havre and Great Falls units had a lot of Chippewa and Cree. And because of the Rocky Boy Reservation that was up there by Havre, but also Hill 57 was down there in Great Falls. And there were other Native Americans scattered through the state that were parts of the units, smaller parts. But it was a big bunch of Native Americans, and they really performed well, as you'll see in this story about Sanananda, the first 19 days of combat, which I was asked to write about 3 months ago by a magazine called Distinctly Montana. So I did. I went through the memories of soldiers that survived in each one of the companies of the 163rd Regiment, and put together a piece that fit within the requirements of the magazine. So it's called Sanananda. You know, it's about the jungle hell that the Montanans got put into. But more than anything, it's about warrior ethos and how that translates into combat. On September 16th, 1940, 1,735 members of the Montana Army National Guard's 163rd Infantry Regiment were sworn into federal military service to protect and defend the United States Constitution, not the President, the United States Constitution. Companies were stationed across the state. 1st Battalion at Sydney, Poplar, Bozeman, and Harleton, Whitehall. 2nd Battalion at Culverts and Wolf Point, Kalispell, Glasgow, and Billings. 3rd Battalion at Great Falls, Lewistown, Billings, and Chinook, with medics at Whitefish and the service company at Bozeman. These men from Montana's small towns and ranching communities had no idea they were about to face some of the most brutal jungle warfare in American military history, or that their National Guard unit would spend longer overseas than any other American division in World War II. Montana's 163rd Infantry Regimental Combat Team headquarters, as well as its 1st Battalion headquarters and Weapons Companies D, H, and M, each in their turn slipped inside the steaming jungle perimeter called Huggins, as 163rd Commander Colonel Jens Dole assumed command of the Sanananda Front on January 3, 1943. Earlier, Lieutenant Harold Fisk from Company C, patrolling with Australian infantry, killed a Japanese sniper hidden in a vine-encased tree. Now Company B men were climbing into water-filled two-man foxholes in the jungle and water surrounding Huggins, a 75 by 50 yard, grassy and bushy flat place under sniper-filled trees. After they'd replaced the exhausted Australian infantry, Japanese attacked twice, each time fast and hard, for an hour, leaving 6 U.S. men dead. 4 days after his first combat kill for the 163rd, Fisk died, leading his platoon in an attack. When his partially cannibalized body was recovered by Company A near perimeter Cano, 300 yards northeast along the corduroy Sanananda Trail from Huggins, Cano became Fisk. This was the hellish reality facing Montana's 163rd Infantry Regimental Combat Team in the steaming jungles of Papua New Guinea. The men from Montana's small towns, farm boys and ranch hands, miners and shop clerks, were in jungle hellholes, L-shaped to help them survive rolling grenades. Straddle latrines outside the trip-wired rattle cans and grenades were for day use. The fetid water rotted clothing and jammed weapons. From a half hour before dark until a half hour after daylight, they listened and looked for snipers with grenades, pins pulled, and lying at arm's length. Any movement in dripping darkness was considered enemy. Black rats, as big as cats, roaches, land crabs, snakes seeking body warmth, tusked boars, corpse-eating crocodiles, tree kangaroos, and monkeys made their own sounds. Leeches and spiders stayed quiet, as did the soldiers even in daylight. Swarming mosquitoes, chiggers, gnats, and flies brought malaria, scrub typhus, dysentery, and dengue fever. Ambulance service for sick or wounded came as stretchers, borne by fuzzy wuzzies, the deeply compassionate, wild-haired indigenous people who often wept when their patient died. Japanese soldiers, following the Bushido military code treating surrender as dishonor, moved about from vine-covered concrete-lined log bunkers engineered with fire lanes coordinating machine guns at perimeters P, at Papa, Quebec, Romeo, Sierra, Tango, and U. P, or Papa, had 4 perimeters comprising the blocking positions on the Killerton Track and the Sanananda Trail, 300 yards southwest of Huggins. Between Huggins and Fisk were Romeo and Quebec on the trail's right and left, respectively. Northeast of Fisk and the trail's bend, Jungle hid U, uniform across from Sierra and Tango on the left. On the second day, Company B sent a patrol to destroy a single machine gun. The gun, hidden in a camouflage pillbox, wounded patrol leader Sergeant Joseph Red Door from Poplar, who then killed most of the emplaced Japanese. The gun still fired, wounding Sergeant Herman Bellegarde from Brockton, who rescued his patrol leader. Next day, 2 Company B platoons lost 8 men killed, another wounded, and 1 missing, bayonet attacking the position which turned out to have 4 more machine guns guarding the flanks of the 1st. Trying again on January 8th, Company B walked with fixed bayonets against Romeo, while Company C attacked Quebec. The old long-style bayonets caught in the vines when raising to fire, which ended their use, with 9 men killed and 8 wounded. Company B fought 2 weeks protecting Huggins, quote, like a frontier outpost against Indians, end of quote. They held off day attacks on 7 sequential days and night attacks on 5 sequential nights. The night of January 11th was a grenade-throwing battle with no losses. A dead Japanese sniper hanging 30 yards over the kitchen area from a rope around his leg, and the sniper killing of his machine gun section sergeant Deval Cassidy of Billings caused Lieutenant Arthur Merrick, Jr. of Great Falls, to organize a 3-man anti-sniper team around the marksmanship of Private First Class Matthew Black Dog of Brockton. The team was interviewed by George Waller of the Chicago Daily News for his 13-part series on the battle. Company E displaced Company B after 2 weeks. On January 9th, Companies G and F passed through the southeast side of Huggins. Crossing the trail, they used machetes and slogged 400 yards west to cut the route for Japanese escaping from Perimeter P, or Papa. Company G, supported by Company F, attacked Japanese on the Killerton track and established Perimeter Rankin, rotating every 24 hours to position a new platoon in deep water near the Japanese. On January 12th, 2 battalions of Australian infantry with 3 tanks stormed Papa and failed, losing 3 tanks and 151 casualties, including 34 killed. On January 14th, the Company B patrol found an enemy soldier south of Huggins and gave him food instead of killing him. After the sick POW revealed that in Papa, all able-bodied men had left, Australia's 18th Brigade attacked P from the south, while Companies G and E attacked from the north, killing 258 Japanese. Company F moved 1.5 miles up the track to push east abreast of Company G and get behind Perimeter Sierra. They entered a prepared field of fire and lost 3 men killed and 4 wounded from 2 machine guns. Corporal Carlton Tidrick of Belton brought his squad forward to engage the guns they thought were in a native hut. There were 2 guns concealed in a narrow ravine that hit Tidrick 3 times and Kenneth Paul of Big Fork 3 times. Using his good right arm, Tidrick half carried and half dragged Paul to safety and reported the machine gun's location. Company F moved on, keeping right of Company G as it flanked several raised huts in an open hospital area near Alpha and Bravo perimeters. For Company G, the stench at the hospital was unbearable. Bodies swarmed by flies lay in rows of 12. Some soldiers were too sick to fight. Others, including orderlies, were clutching grenades. And when a corpse sat up and started firing, a brutal firefight broke out and grenades held under blankets by some patients exploded. Starting with enemy riflemen and light machine gunners, 163rd men shot anything that moved. Meanwhile, back at the ravine, Company E's Captain Buckland of Browning and Sergeant Lund of Wolf Point killed the gunners that killed and wounded Company F men. The next night of January 17th, more Japanese blundered into Company F to be killed while causing more casualties. On January 18th, Company F patrolled south along the east side of Sanananda Trail to north of Uniform, killing 54 Japanese while suffering 1 wounded and 1 killed. On January 19th, Corporal Leslie Cameron of Kalispell, covered by riflemen, crawled close to Japanese lines to call indirect fires from his weapons platoon, Aussie Field Artillery, and the 163rd's 81mm mortar battery onto a Japanese position 150 yards wide. With fixed bayonets, they charged on line into a draw and crossed a small stream, but were surprised by heavy enemy fire. Losses from the bayonet charge were 7 dead and 14 wounded, 1 seriously. After Uniform was liquidated 4 days later, Company F learned that they'd assaulted an almost impregnable position of 19 machine guns in heavily manned and lined log bunkers organized around machine guns bolted to the motor blocks of buried trucks. Company E had replaced Company F and provided fire support for the successful assault by Companies I and L on January 23rd. By then, Company F suffered 15 killed, 22 wounded, and 1 seriously injured. Meanwhile, Company A had been attacking enemy position Quebec in phases, with only their heads and weapons above water to occupy Romeo's vacant enemy positions. Heavy with the stench of dead, Using mortar and artillery fires to clear Romeo, they left a 15-foot tall stump in its center, equipped it with a ladder of telephone wire, and monitored enemy movement across the trail inside Quebec. Second platoon crossed the trail north of Quebec, muffled by heavy rain, and as they crawled with 2 squads up and 1 back, they passed 3 skeletons wearing dog tags from the U.S. 32nd Infantry Division. They turned south in 6-inch deep water around the east end of a 30-yard open grassland. The platoon leader rolled a grenade down a machine gun fire lane, signaling both lead squads to begin shooting. The Japanese responded with devastating machine gun and rifle fire. The platoon retreated with 4 wounded toward Romeo. On January 15th, Company A, less its 3rd platoon, attacked Quebec with 2nd platoon targeting the machine guns and having 1st platoon pass through them to break through the first line of bunkers. Company A held its ground under heavy fire from deeper in the perimeter, while Companies B and C joined the attack. For his actions, Sergeant Paul Zigley of Jordan earned the Distinguished Service Cross. The next morning, Company A, supported by 15 minutes of battalion mortar and heavy machine gun fire, attacked at 0900 northeast from Fisk, across 200 yards of open terrain against unknown enemy strength at Sierra. Companies B and C struck from the west and northwest. Mortar fire fell short and there was insufficient coordination between the 3 companies. Company A lost 9 men killed, 17 wounded, with 18 men and 2 officers heat exhausted from crawling in the sun under clear skies. Company B, serving as reserve to Companies A and C, did not know the attack had failed and almost walked single file into Sierra. Learning Company A was in trouble, 3rd Platoon tried to help and suffered 5 casualties before escaping in darkness. After 2 weeks in the jungle, most men had malaria, with 109-degree temperatures, yet Huggins held. On January 21st, a 2,000-round mortar barrage preceded by a 4-company attack by 1st Battalion on Sierra. Company B passed a corpse heap of 300 Korean Marines and 3 dual-purpose cannon with ammunition 24 inches long in clips of 6 stacked like cordwood. Company B killed 165 Japanese while suffering no losses. Having started fighting at Sanananda with 187 men, Company B was ending with 21 able-bodied, 112 sick, 27 wounded, and 27 killed. Back on the morning of January 12th, Company L, after losing 1 man to a sniper, attacked northward to destroy Japanese coconut log pillboxes, losing 3 more men killed and 2 wounded while killing 10 enemy. The next day, 3 companies in Huggins conducted a major assault on the same area for 5 hours. Company L found most of the enemy had pulled back, then buried the remaining bodies. By January 17th, many Company L men were being moved to the rear with dysentery, fever, diarrhea, and skin disorders, and the company was placed in 3rd Battalion Reserve. On January 20th, Company L received an attack order that was canceled in favor of Company I having better strength. Since January 17th, Company I had been actively patrolling from Fisk and attacking uniform on the 18th, 19th, and 20th, resulting in significant casualties. Then well into its main attack on January 21st, an 81mm mortar fired short near company headquarters, killing Captain Dupree of Poplar and First Sergeant Boland of Great Falls, and wounding 3 others. With Lieutenant Odell of Billings leading, Company I, with elements of Company L, attacked the next day and the next, killing a large number of enemy rifle and mortar men, while losing a total of 10 dead and 18 wounded. The same day, Company K engaged in severe hand-to-hand combat with Japanese, who stumbled into their perimeter. On January 22nd, that's 19 days after the battle started. The entire 163rd Regiment conducted a 41-minute sweeping attack following concentrated mortar, machine gun, and artillery fires. These men from each squad, 3 men from each squad, walked out in front on point as company machine guns swept the trees with continuous fire. Company G killed 50 Japanese. A sergeant in Company I was killed. Company K killed 32 Japanese and took 1 prisoner. Company L killed 36 Japanese. The next day, 3 Japanese rose from the bush near Company K, but when Lieutenant Rostrom motioned them to raise their arms, a camouflaged machine gun and machine gunner killed the officer. All of the Japanese involved were killed, thus clearing the track and the trail to the Solomon Sea. Montana's 163rd Regiment experienced 97 killed, 250 wounded, and 4 missing in action, with nearly everyone else sick. Later, these survivors heard the Japanese propagandist, Tokyo Rose, call them, quote, the bloody butchers of Sanananda, end of quote. The 163rd Regimental Combat Team made amphibious landings later at Atape, Wakde, Toem, Biak, Zamboanga, and Jolo, and fought across central Mindanao. At Kure, Japan, they landed near Hiroshima and walked through piles of radiated ashes. In late 1945, the last survivors sailed aboard the Admiral Mayo into Seattle's Elliott Bay. My Butte neighbor, John T. Shea, drafted with the first 17-year-olds to fight in the 7th Infantry Division on Okinawa, told me about disembarking from the front portion of the Mayo, which had been sealed by crew quarters from the back portion. Quote, I was walking down the gangplank and I turned around and the guy right behind me was from Montana. I think his name was Hawk. Yeah, that's right, Tommy Hawk. He was from one of those towns out in eastern Montana, Livingston or somewhere. He looked like hell. He'd been fighting in the jungle the whole damn war. That was Company B's William Hawk of Poplar, returned with the 41st Infantry Division Jungleers from the longest overseas deployment of any American division in World War II.